So the industrial elite of the 1800s, bankers, empire builders, and early corporations designed schools to create obedient workers for their growing industries. It was not about education, as we all know by now. It was about economic control, social engineering, and mass behavioral programming. Perugia would be the original blueprint in the early 1800s, where it all began. So Perugia is now part of Germany, and Perugia created the first modern compulsory schooling system around 1807 to 1819 after they lost to Napoleon. But this wasn't about making thinkers, it was about producing obedient soldiers, disciplined factory workers, loyal nationalists, passive citizens. The Perugian model included age-based grades that we all know and love, timed bells, rigid discipline, and exams to rank and sort children. The key goal was obedience over critical thinking. We don't need thinkers, we need workers. The underlying philosophy. This Perugian model became the template for public schooling worldwide. After Perugia, there's a man named Horace Mann from the United States. His era was around 1840s to 1850s, and he's known as the father of American education. Horace Mann studied the Perugian system and brought it to the US. He said that schools should create a moral and obedient population, teach kids to conform to rules, prepare them for industrial life. He saw the idea as a way to uplift poor and immigrant children, but the real goal was to mold a dependable labor class for emerging factories. And obviously, you guys are very aware of some of these industrial capitalists like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan, which was by the late 1800s to the early 1900s when the US industrialists took over. They didn't want philosophers, they wanted punctual workers, mechanically minded men, women who would stay in line, citizens who wouldn't question authority. Yeah, so John D. Rockefeller was part of entering that factory school pipeline, one of the most richest men in history. And he said himself, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. He founded the General Education Board in 1903, which shaped schools and curriculums for generations. Curriculum shifted towards reading just enough to follow instructions. You learned just enough maths so you can handle machines. History was permanently rewritten to glorify the state by then, and there was no real focus on self-awareness, spiritual growth, or critical thinking. And there still isn't really in schools. And then, rolling out the British Empire's global school, where the UK passed the Elementary Education Act in 1870, making school compulsory. Colonial governments copied this across Africa, India, and the Caribbean, but the intent was never empowerment. It was to replace indigenous knowledge with empire loyalty, erase ancestral languages and worldviews, train locals to be clerks, soldiers, and laborers for empire systems. And also, of course, it was so easy for them to roll this out at the time. They've already raped, pillaged, and taken over most of the world by this point. Do you know what I mean? Indigenous nations were now burned and broken, spiritual systems outlawed, resources stolen, languages suppressed, and people divided, conquered, and stripped of memory. So now they had a blank slate, a traumatized population, check. The perfect moment to install their worldview system. Schools and factories